I have the pleasure of introducing Kwame Christian. I have to read it. I didn't get it memorized. So Kwame is a business lawyer who is passionate about teaching professionals like you how to negotiate and be more persuasive. He believes the best things in life lie on the other side of a difficult conversation. I lost my place. There we go. He believes, I already said that, improving these skills will lead to the financial gain, career advancement, effective collaboration, improved performance, and increased confidence in difficult conversations. Kwame founded the American Negotiation Institute, whose workshops are designed to give you confidence you need to overcome fear, frustration, and anxiety associated with difficult conversations. These workshops are designed to help you to communicate confidently, deal with difficult people, and get what you deserve. Kwame, we were introduced to him last year. Brady Ware had a women's leadership conference in Columbus, and he was one of our speakers. And Brian Filoni and I were in his breakout session, and he absolutely overwhelmed us. It was the most dynamic speaker I've ever had, so please welcome Kwame.
Thank you very much. Hopefully I'm not too overwhelming this morning. I'm excited to be here. This is going to be fun. And so with the way that I present, usually I bring the clicker with me, but today I left it over here. It requires a lot of engagement, okay? So there are a few rules, really just one rule. So you have to play with me, all right? So I'm going to ask questions, and these questions are not rhetorical. I actually want answers. So if I ask a question and I don't get an answer and you think I'm joking, I will look in the audience and find the person who yawned last, and I'll pick on them, and they'll participate for us. And so I present better the more I'm interrupted. So if you have a question, even if it comes up mid-sentence, raise your hand, let's talk about it. Because most likely, if you have a question, somebody else in the audience has the exact same question, they just didn't want to raise their hand. And so this presentation is going to be customized by you. And so of course I have slides, and those are going to introduce general topics, but will become more focused based on the questions and the participation we get. So every presentation is a little bit different, and we go in fun and unique places. Sound good? Good. Awesome. So, question number one, what is conflict? The questions get harder, okay? What is conflict? Disagreement, good. Disagreement between who? People, a lot of things, good. Organization, individuals in organizations, good. Where else do we see conflict? Yourself. Who said yourself? Yes, we are getting zen early in the morning. I love it. That's good. That is good. So remember that, because we're going to come back to that point later on, because that's important. Because I think a lot of times people say, oh, you need to negotiate with yourself. But we don't really know how to do that. And so I'm going to introduce a framework that you could use to actually operationalize that process. So it's not just talking to yourself aimlessly. So good. So let's get another definition of conflict. Yes? Stress. Stress. That is a symptom of conflict. Yeah. How many other people feel stressed when they feel engage in conflict? Okay, so we have about 50%, and then 50% are lying. That's cool. What other feelings do you have? Yeah. A motivator for change. Very good. Very good. And I heard, did somebody say fear? Fear, yes. How many other people feel fear? Yes. Anxiety, does that come up too? Yes. And so what's funny is I did a TED Talk here last year, and it was called Finding Confidence in Conflict. And so I have a podcast called Negotiate Anything, shameless plug. And so I'm a real nerd with it, because I want to try to produce content that people want to hear. And so as a lawyer, I'm always thinking about strategy and tactics. That's my thing. So I surveyed the audience, and I said, all right, audience, what are your biggest concerns? And I was expecting very nuanced answers. But the things that kept coming up is that people are afraid of difficult conversations, they don't feel confident, and they feel anxiety. And And I was blown away. And so I changed the entire topic, like the entire approach for the TED Talk. Because what I recognize is a lot of times we give recipes to people who are afraid to get in the kitchen. It doesn't matter if I give you tactics if you're not going to use them or even engage in the conversation. So something that you'll learn about me, and it'll make the way that I present it'll make more sense, is that my background is in psychology. And so my degree is in psychology, and I wanted to be a clinical psychologist. And then while walking through undergrad, I tripped, and then I became a lawyer. So that's how it happened. But this is the way I come back to it, because that was my biggest fear, my biggest issue when it came to difficult conversations. And so the reason that I like presenting in this way is because I used to be a people pleaser, and then by utilizing cognitive behavioral therapy on myself, I had one patient, that was me, and I got through it. And so now I'm confident and I can do it. And so with this presentation, the first half is going to be addressing your psychological barriers and trying to change your mindset and the way you think about conflict. And then we're going to introduce a tactic that you can use. Sound good? Cool. All right, any other notes on conflict? Anybody else want to add anything? Okay. Now, is there conflict on boards? Does that happen? I'm hearing laughter. That's why I'm here. What kind of conflict do we experience on boards? Let's try and get specific. What does it look like? Deadlines. Deadlines. Who said deadlines? Yes, okay. So what kind of deadlines are we dealing with?
To get projects done.
Good. Very good. What other conflicts do we have?
Some people participate much more than others.
Aha, so participation. And so engaging the right people and getting equal or at least fair participation from people. Very good. Effective communication. I love that. This is perfect. Why do you say effective communication?
There's a lot of communication that happens, but it's not effective, and it's just complaining. And the other part of it is people don't respond in a timely manner to requests.
Nice. Very good. One of my favorite sayings about communication is the most difficult thing about communication is the illusion that it has happened. So this is good. Now, let's dig deeper into this. So effective communication. What is the difference between effective communication and persuasive communication? What is the goal of effective communication?
Both parties understand.
Both parties understand. Good. Anybody want to add to that? Okay. Oh, yes? Shared meaning. Good. So both parties understand, and then we can communicate the meaning behind our words to the other party effectively, right? Then what's persuasive communication? Yeah, so getting somebody to change their position to what you want them to do. So behavior change, essentially, right? Or at least changing the way they think. Anybody want to add to persuasive communication? All right. Now here's where it gets interesting. Can you give me an example of communication that is not persuasive in nature?
That was stupid.
Oh my gosh. I love it. No, this is a really great example. Okay, so that was stupid. So you're communicating that to a person who did something that was stupid, right? And so does that person think what they did was stupid? Maybe now. But the goal there was to persuade them that what they did was stupid, because at the time, they might not have thought that, right? So it's persuasive. Let's try again. Let's play this game. Silence. Oh, really? You think so? How many people have heard about in negotiation you utilize silence? How do you utilize silence? Body movement. Is somebody going to dance? I didn't see who said it. Body movement. Yes, okay, good. So you're looking at body language. Okay, good. Very, very good. So as I go through, I'll try to remember to do this more often. I'll give book references. So the best book on body language is by Joe Navarro called What Every Body is Thinking. You see the pun? That was good. It's really good. And now when you actually start to analyze body language, it gets really, really creepy because their bodies are screaming things to you at all times, and we miss it. Let me just give a quick thing about body language before we move on, because I think it's important. So if I'm standing here like this, body language-wise, what does this mean? Closed up, uncomfortable, oh, comfortable. What else? Showing authority. Oh, good. Or like disapproval. Stubborn.
You're bored.
I'm bored. Now I'm concerned. I'm looking for everybody who has their arms crossed now. Good. Let's get one more. Holding something back and closed. Okay, good. Okay, those are options. But you see how they're very different. Some of them are very different. Most of them are negative, right? So I'm a first-generation Caribbean American. I get cold really easily. And so sometimes I turn myself into a little Kwame knot, and it warms me up. You know, I was working with somebody, and he was Mormon, and he said that he was taught to walk while holding his arms like this as a signal of humility. And so now, as a business lawyer negotiating six-figure deals, people think he's standoffish, and he's like, no, this is just how I stand. It feels good. And so the answer to what does this mean is nothing. It means nothing, because you don't know me at all. And so one of the things that's important about body language is you need to establish a baseline. So through small talk and talking to people, you can establish a baseline. How do they typically respond to certain things? And so by talking to me, you might say, oh, well, Kwame just typically stands like that. That's just who he is. So that's one thing. Another thing, too, is that you cannot read body language in isolation. So this alone is not enough. So you want to look for clusters of body language. So clusters are things that happen, that the person does in response to a stimulus that happens within 2 to 3 seconds of the stimulus. So if you say something and I just do this, okay, that's one thing. That's not enough. But if you say something like, if you say that was stupid, and I do this, and then I squint and my eyebrows go down, oh, that's 3 things within a short period of time. So let me pay attention to that. And so with body language, you can't tell whether somebody's lying per se, but you can tell comfort versus discomfort. Do I like that, or do I dislike that? And then you can use it as a signal to investigate further. So book reference, what everybody is thinking. And so see, this is why we participate, because we go places where we don't think we're going to go. So this is fun. Good, very good. And with silence, to your point, sometimes silence gives the other person an opportunity to adjust. And so as a mediator, I've done over 100 mediations. And sometimes if you introduce something to somebody and they recognize that, oh, I need to adjust my position, my reality, what I thought reality was actually incorrect. And so it takes a little bit of time for that to process. So sometimes even silence can be persuasive in nature. And so here's the thing. When it comes to communication, the majority of what we say is persuasive in nature, right? Even if we're saying, all right, hey, I saw this movie. I thought it was good. I'm not just saying that. It's because I want you to think that too, right? And so I want you to shift a little bit to think of these conversations, every single human interaction that we have, as a strategic opportunity. What is the persuasive opportunity here? Where am I trying to get them to go? Because if we just simply leave it up to effective communication, they might understand but not change. So how many of you have children? Good. Oh my goodness. We have a fertile crowd. Fertile crowd. I have a son. He's going to be introduced later. But if you were to effectively communicate with your child, and then they say, you know what, Dad, I know driving 90 miles per hour is very, very dangerous. I'm going to keep doing it though. It's like, well, that wasn't successful. You effectively communicated the danger, but you were ineffective in changing behavior. And so that's why I want you to think a little bit more strategic about these interactions. Make sense? Good? Questions? Yes?
A lot of conflicted conversations led by interpretation. Can you touch on interpretation?
Yes. This is good. This is good. Because I feel like you looked at my slides, but it's all good. Yes, interpretation is one of the critical elements of conflict. Differing interpretations. And so the thing is, when it comes to our vision of reality, you've heard the term perception is reality, right? And I'm not going to get into like the which side is right or wrong or anything, but you think about politics, both sides can see the exact same thing, the exact same factual thing, but interpret it completely differently. And those interpretations, those perceptions become reality. And so we'll get to this a little bit more, but what we're recognizing is that the facts, like relying on facts and what's right, or what we perceive as right, is ineffective as a persuasive tool. And so focusing on interpretation is going to be critical. That's a really good point. Good. Anybody else before we go on? Cool. All right. So yeah, conflict is an opportunity. And so this begs the question, an opportunity for what? And we've touched on a little bit, but what other opportunities? Let's try and think creatively about this.
For a synthesis.
For synthesis. Yes. So what do you mean by that?
Well, you have an ideal that's presented, and then you have the opposing ideas, and the choices to ideally rise to a higher level, so that would be synthesis.
I love it. Did everybody hear that? So the idea was synthesis. So you have an idea, and then you have an opposing idea, or opposing ideas in the room, and then you have a discussion, and you work to elevate that idea to create something better, correct?
Correct.
Good. I like that. Good. What other opportunities do we have? Yes?
Problem solving.
Problem solving. Good. Very, very good. Yeah. And when you say problem solving,
Well, you may have conflict because you have 2 or 3 competing ideas. In their own realms, they may all be equally useful and valid. But then you have to make a decision which one provides the best opportunity. So, although you have different ideas, there's not necessarily conflict as such.
I love it. That's great. And so I love putting these two things together. So you might have different ideas, and it's not a situation where one is better objectively than the other. They're just different. And so we're trying to reconcile those differences and create a unified vision. Good. What other opportunities do we have?
Self-growth.
Self-growth. That's so deep. Good. Self-growth. What do you mean by self-growth, and how does it happen in conflict?
Well, I'm a stressful kind of person, and so with each opportunity and each conflict that I overcome, I see myself growing even more.
Very good. Exactly. Yes. So for every conflict you engage in, you grow a little bit stronger because it makes you better. And so when you think about these conflicts or negotiations or difficult conversations in general, it might be unpleasant to engage in them, but recognize that every time you do it, it's going to become a little bit easier the next time. And so even if you don't get the outcome that you want, if you're improving and getting better, it's going to put you in a better position for self-growth. And most likely, with the trajectory of our careers, the stakes are going to get higher with every negotiation we have, because we hope to advance year to year. And so that if we're advancing year to year, that means the stakes of our conversations are going to get higher and higher. And so if we take the time to practice this year, it puts us in a better position skill-wise to be more effective next year. It's a very good point. Good. One more? So many more. Yes.
I think reconciliation between the people with the different opinions is the biggest opportunity that I see. Because for me, I've found that there are just sometimes when a relationship can't go further until reconciliation happens. But once this conflict is over, the reconciliation happens and the relationship just improves dramatically.
Exactly. That's great. And so did everybody hear that? The idea of reconciliation. And that's one of the things that you can use conflict to do. It's a signal that something is a little bit off in the relationship. And so, for instance, if you're a doctor, my wife is a doctor, so I like medical examples. If she's a doctor, and if a patient were to come in and say, "Hey, my foot hurts," would she be very good if she said, "Well, let's ignore it and hope it just gets better"? It's like, what am I paying you for? So it's an opportunity to make the situation better. So conflict is a signal of something deeper that needs to be addressed. And now we can use it to bring people together. Or it also gives you the opportunity to recognize that through this investigation, maybe there is no way to reconcile these 2 points. Maybe this person is not a good fit. And we can use conflict in an investigatory fashion to discover whether or not this person or this situation needs to be removed, right? So a doctor doesn't just fix things. Sometimes a doctor needs to remove things that are malignant. And conflict gives you an opportunity to do that in a very targeted, strategic fashion. Make sense? Did you have your hand up, sir? With the impressive beard? I'm jealous. You! Not her. Yeah. What were you going to say?
Helps gain perspective. I work at the YWCA. We talk a lot about race, class, and gender. There's some people, for example, on our board who are more traditional thinking, and often meet conversations around some of those topics with conflict.
Yeah.
And it allows them to gain perspective around maybe a situation that they don't experience.
I love that. That's a great point. Did everybody hear that? The opportunity to gain perspective. And so it's a learning opportunity on both sides. And through engaging in conflict in a meaningful way, asking questions and opening up dialogue in a way that makes the other person feel safe, that's going to be critical in increasing understanding on both sides. And it's really important to kind of emphasize the fact that we need to do it in a safe way. Because if we assert ourselves as having the moral high ground, then what does that imply for the other side? That they have the moral low ground. Who here loves feeling like they have the moral low ground? No. And so that makes you recoil. You know, I'm not going to engage in a meaningful fashion. And now we don't have that free flow of information. So that I really love that example. Thank you. Good. And so the point is, what I'm trying to do here is get you to think strategically or a little bit more positively about conflict. Because psychologically, what we're doing every time we are in navigating the world is we are determining whether or not we are going to approach or avoid this particular thing. And typically with conflict, our minds are set to avoid. And so we run away from it. And even if we are forced to do it, because we're afraid of it, we don't do it effectively. And so I'm trying to get you to see the opportunity, because if you're moving towards something, you're a lot more effective compared to if you're trying to run away from it all the time. Good? Cool. All right. So we talked about conflict. What is negotiation? What's your definition for negotiation? Yes? A win-win solution. Very good. Very good. What does a win-win look like? Because that's a term that's used a lot. Good for both parties. Very good. Very good. What else? Any other thoughts on negotiation? Yeah. Compromise. Nice. I like that word. I remember there was an interview a few years ago with a politician, and they said, so there's a lot of partisanship right now. What do you think about the possibility of compromise? Do you think that would be good for America? And the person tried to answer the question without using the word compromise. And so the interviewer noticed it, and she said, well, tell me more about compromise. He refused to do it. And then she said, why won't you say the word? Why wouldn't you say the word? But we're in a situation where, politically speaking, a lot of times it's so contentious that they don't even want to say that word, because then it'll be used in an attack ad. That man is weak. Get him out. So yes, but compromise is critical in the normal world. But if we're engaging in negotiation and we want something, doesn't compromise mean that we're losing something too? I'm seeing nobody wants to commit to this. Yes.
And it's interesting that they said compromise, because in the sales world, that's not what you're driving for when you negotiate. Mm-hmm. You already have an objective or several objectives in mind, so you're willing to give up some things that you never really wanted in the first place in order to get what you want.
Gotcha. So it's a situation where you're willing to give up a little bit in order to ultimately get what you want in an acceptable fashion. It might not be the gold standard, but we'll accept silver.
Yeah, the only other adjective I would use to describe that is you you're giving up something that you never wanted in the first place.
Aha, did everybody hear that? Okay, so when it comes to compromise, you might have a gold standard, but then you reduce it to silver in order to get something that is acceptable. But strategically, what you want to do in a compromise is give up something that you didn't really want or you don't value very highly. Good, yeah, and so I love chess. I'm a chess nerd. And so in chess, you have strategic sacrifices. You sacrifice a piece to improve your overall position. And with this mindset that I'm trying to focus on right now, it's all about strategically putting yourself in the best position for success. That's all you can do. And approach the conversation in the way that puts you in the best position for success, while knowing that you can do everything perfectly right and still not get what you want. And that's important, because I have a 3-year-old, and my self-esteem would be terrible if I gauged it on how well I can persuade him. I could do everything right and still lose, and that's okay. So your goal is that, like you said earlier, self-improvement. You always want to engage in the conversation that puts you in the best position for success, because it makes you better and you could possibly get what you want. Did I see a hand here?
Opposite the win-win, I've always heard the old adage that whenever it comes to conflict or negotiation, if both parties leave the table feeling just a little unhappy with the outcome, that you actually had a meaningful engagement. There was no win, because it's like sports. 2 teams can't win the same game.
Right.
So if we mutually lost a little bit and left it on the table, it probably in the long run was a good interaction and possibly a good decision.
Yeah, I like that. That's a good point. You know, if you're compromising effectively, both sides probably give up a little bit. And I have to remember in this, what we're talking about in conflict, especially at the board level, everybody's on the same team. Ultimately, we're fighting for the same team. We have the same mission. So it's less competitive. And so in a situation like this, we recognize that compromise is almost a necessity, right? Whereas tomorrow I'm going to be in Maryland teaching a procurement negotiation team. And so it's going to be all about winning. But we have to take a very different approach. If we think about it in terms of a competitive type of interaction, it's going to interfere with group cohesion, and it's going to make the other person less likely to engage in conflict in the future, and probably you less likely to engage, because you're conflating conflict and combat. Where conflict is an opportunity to engage in a meaningful way, possibly strengthen the relationship and increase understanding. But combat, on the other hand, is something that you do where your goal is to do damage. And if you think you're going to do damage, most likely you think the other person's going to do damage. And even if you do well, you're going to be hurting. So changing that from combat to conflict is going to be important. Did I see a hand? Mm-hmm.
All of the conversations I've ever had to, can we agree to disagree, are all very good friends of mine. So I think just being open to hearing other people's side of things, it doesn't mean that you necessarily win the negotiation, but there's an ongoing friendship there that will last forever, and you both learn from each other.
Absolutely. And I think this is a perfect way to transition into the goals of negotiation. And so I see there as being 3 main goals: to get more of what we want, to avoid things that we don't want, and to strengthen the relationship. And if you think about those 3 goals when you go into every interaction, you can recognize that I might not get anything that I want. Bad things might still happen. I couldn't avoid it. But in every single interaction, I can engage in it in a respectful way to improve the relationship and strengthen the relationship, because there's still value in the relationship. Yes?
Could you repeat those 3, please?
Yes. So get more of what you want, offense. Avoid things that you don't want, defense. And strengthen relationships. Not a word for that, but strengthen relationships. Good. And so I like really simple definitions, because I think it makes it easier to understand. And so my definition of negotiation is any conversation where somebody in the conversation wants something. And so it's intentionally broad, because I want you to recognize that negotiation is everywhere. And if you don't recognize that negotiation is everywhere, then you don't utilize these skills in order to maximize the outcomes of the interaction. So imagine if there was a boxer. This boxer had the best skills, just super fast, super strong, a really high-level boxer. But he had one weakness. This boxer did not recognize when a fight began. How good would you be if you never knew when a fight began? And I think a lot of times people they walk through their daily interactions not recognizing that there are strategic opportunities within every interaction to move the needle in some way. Even if there's not a substantive outcome that we're going for, we could still use these persuasive techniques to increase the strength of our relationship. And we're making deposits into the relationship bank account. So when the interaction that actually occurs that could be defined as a conflict, the relationship is strong and can withstand it. Make sense? So my definition for conflict is a negotiation with attitude. Super simple. So there are opposing sides, but there is an emotional element that makes it more difficult. So what is our, yes?
I'm sorry, can I bring up
Yeah.
result in terms of negotiating and conflict? Because often people, well, if you disagree, so that's, then you are put on a different platform, right? So if you are less wealthy than someone you're negotiating with, there's a different game plan. So how I approach that is because I don't come to sell, but I still have a voice that needs to be heard, is that stance of, I love you even though, I don't quite agree with this.
Mhm.
That framework of, can we agree to disagree and still maintain the friendship? Because wealth and power does have a place there. And often people of less means won't voice their opinion
Right.
in fear of conflict, which I'm sure that's part of it.
Yeah, no, this is perfect. This is perfect. Yeah.
I have something to add to that.
Yeah.
Agree to disagree in some situations just won't work though. Because you have to agree when it comes to like processes, like I remember a time when sales is fighting with finance. They can agree to disagree, but then if they go about their business doing the exact same thing they have been
Oh,
doing.
yeah, that's what.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
And so a lot of times the agreeing to disagree, I think you can still be friends, but you have to agree on how you're moving forward.
And so let's address those two issues because this is really good. And this is why we participate, because it gets fun. So new book reference, Bargaining for Advantage. The author, I forget the author's name, but he does a really great job of analyzing the power, the sources of power. So whenever you feel as though you don't have as much power, use that as a trigger to do a power analysis. So there are three sources of power. There is positive power, negative power, and normative power. So positive power is a situation where you give somebody something to improve their life, and as a result, that person reciprocates. So that's the carrot approach. Then negative power, it comes from your ability to introduce something bad into somebody else's life, and as a result, they say, this is terrible, here. And so that's negative. That's the stick. And then normative, that is finding power from the rules, the standards, or society in general to bolster your argument, like the status quo. This is how we've always done it. It's persuasive, it's a source of power. And so whenever we're negotiating, what we need to do is we need to identify the sources of power that are working against us, while at the same time identifying sources of power that work in our favor. And so if you're in a situation where the example you gave was somebody very wealthy versus somebody who doesn't have as many resources, then they have probably positive and negative power. But if you're creative, you can find a source of normative power. Are the social norms working in your favor? Do you have some kind of social following that would back you up? An organization you're associated with that can support you? And so when you're negotiating, find those sources of power so you can try and level the playing field. And so think about it in terms of a spectrum. So if you have more power, then you can leverage that power without much concern about what the other person wants or needs. But if you have less power, you need to be more creative. So the person with more power has more power to divide the pie, the proverbial negotiation pie. This is the thing that's on the table that we're trying to get. But the person with less power realizes, I don't have that power to divide the pie. I'm going to get a smaller percentage. So if I'm more creative, then I can expand the pie. So even if I'm getting a smaller percentage, it's more for me. Does that make sense? That help a lot? Good. And now to your point too, when it comes to conflict and negotiation, I think it's important to identify the realistic end goals. And so if it's a social interaction where it really doesn't matter too much, agreeing to disagree is okay. But what happens, especially if you have an underlying relationship and there is a situation where we need to make a decision one way or the other, and it is a little bit more of I see things this way and you see things that way. One of the most dangerous things is if you're negotiating with a friend in that situation because you want to protect the friendship and it causes you to not push as hard as you typically would. And so that's why, and we're going to get to this toward the end, that's why it's important to have a framework that you can rely on that allows you to negotiate in a respectful way that can maintain the underlying relationship. And so the concern with what you said is that sometimes we give up too easily or let it go too easily. But if you do it the right way, you can push and push and push, but still end up with a relationship that survives at the end. Make sense? Good questions. Good. All right. Any questions before I move on? All right. There. I'm on the same page as me. Did I hear something? Somebody say something? Okay, cool. Light theory of negotiation. How many of you have heard of this theory of negotiation? Raise your hand. Good, because I just made it up. So imagine if you entered this room, but the lights were on. Lights were off, pitch black, right? Your goal was to get from that door over here to the kitchen because you're hungry, okay? What would be the first order of business? Find the light switch. Why? So you can see. Why do you want to see? So you don't trip over something. It would be dangerous to proceed with the lights off, right? This makes sense. So with this metaphor, let's take it to a difficult conversation. And so just terminology-wise, I use difficult conversation to encompass conflict and negotiation. So let's take it to a difficult conversation. Typically, when we enter these conversations, the lights are off. We don't know where we're going. And so in this metaphor, light is information. We need more information. A lot of times we go in and we have our perspective. We think we know everything and we say, well, I think I know everything and I'm really hungry. I'm going to sprint to that door. And then what happens? We're tripping over people, hurting ourselves, hurting other people because we're blindly moving through the conversation when the lights aren't on. So the question is then, how do we turn on the lights in these conversations?
Ask questions.
Ask questions. Very, very good. So what kind of questions do we ask?
The what's.
The what's. Yes. Good. What else? Give another example.
Like personal similarities?
Oh, I like that. Good. Why would you ask that kind of question?
Well, because you have experiences that brought you to that difficult conversation, and if you can say things that you have that are like what they have, then it's easier to talk.
Good. Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes sense. But how do we ask the questions? Oh, what do you expect to get out of this? And that's an example of a question you would ask in the conversation.
What you want.
Okay.
Find out what they need.
Yes, now I get it. Right. So a question that starts with what? What other kind of preamble can we use? Why? What other questions? How can I help you? What, why, how? Yeah, what kind of questions are these? Open-ended questions. Right. Very, very, very good, very good. So why do we rely on open-ended questions? What's special about them? Starts the conversation. Right. People can elaborate. Because if you ask questions like a prosecutor, what happens? These are closed-ended questions. What happens?
Shut down.
People shut down. They get defensive. And so, and even if they don't shut down or get defensive, you are shutting them down because if you ask yes or no questions, there's a very limited response that you can get. You're turning on a very narrow light. And so you want to turn on as many lights as possible, as broadly as possible. So questions that are open-ended are going to be your key. And now, another thing that you could use is something I like to call open-ended statements. And so this is something like, tell me more about this, help me to understand that, and silence works for getting them to elaborate as well. But the goal is to get them to talk as much as possible. That is the goal here. Yes?
People get uncomfortable when there's silence, talking and you don't say anything, that the other person is usually going to fill that void.
Exactly. It's very uncomfortable. And so if you're talking and there's a break in the conversation, it'll feel like a long time. 2 to 3 seconds feels like forever, and it's super, super, super awkward. The longest that I've waited in in silence, oh, this is weird. And I think the fact that I have a podcast helps me to maintain form, because I keep telling myself, ooh, this is awkward, but it'll be a great story on the show. It was about 40 seconds. 40 seconds of painful silence. My insides were melting, but it worked. The person was slowly recognizing that in his mind, he was the wronged victim. And then we provided emails in this mediation, that showed like, oh, you weren't the wrong person. Because a lot of times we say, all right, I'm the hero or the villain in this situation. But then it takes a long time for you to change your perspective and say, oh no. Because sometimes we justify our behavior based on what we think somebody else is doing. So this is called the just world hypothesis. And so we like to believe that the world is just. If we don't feel like it's just, we have these internal scales of justice where we will try to make sure that we rebalance the relationship. And so a lot of times people then retaliate because they believe somebody did something bad to them. So he realized that he retaliated against somebody who did not do anything bad to him. So he was the bad guy. So 40 seconds of silence for him to reorient to that new reality. But it's powerful. Good. Does anybody else have another way that they ask questions or get more information using this? Yes?
You said open-ended statements. Would it be effective to start by saying, it is my understanding we're here to discuss or resolve this, and then ask them if they agree that this is the purpose of why we're having the discussion?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And we're going to get to this a little bit later too, but that's called framing. So what we're doing with framing is we're putting a storyline over the conversation. And so you do this early and often within the conversation. So why are we having this conversation? What's the purpose? What are my motives? And so your goal with this stage is to paint a picture that is so positive, so great, and fantastic that they would look utterly ridiculous if they were to reject that frame. And so if you were to say something like, listen, we're all here on this board because we want to help homeless people. I don't have any money in this, and I'm just trying to make sure that we're on the same page so we can be more effective in helping our constituents. And the person says, I don't care about the constituents, I just want to be right. Whoa. Nobody's going to say that. So you want to take the time to frame the story effectively before having the conversation. Because if you don't do that and you allow that to be subject to interpretation, if they have that mindset where they think they're afraid of conflict and they see it as a threat to themselves, they're going to look at everything through that lens. And anytime you say something that they don't agree with, they're going to take it as a threat. And so you want to create that storyline to make it more likely that they'll give you the benefit of the doubt and not see it as a threat. Very good. Yes?
Yeah, sometimes I like framing a conversation or a meeting or an interaction like that by asking up front, what would success look like?
Oh, yeah.
Because all parties haven't always considered that, and it gives everyone a chance to imagine it up front. Once it's on the table, then you can scale how close or far you can get to success.
I love that. That's brilliant. Did everybody hear that? No. Okay. So asking the question up front, what does success look like for you? And have them paint that picture as well. And if you're on the board, again, it should be relatively close. And one of the things that was introduced in the book, Getting to Yes, Roger Fisher and William Ury, it was the fundamental book in collaborative negotiation. They talk about separating positions from interests. And positions are the what. What am I specifically asking for in this conversation? Interests, that gets to the why. Why do you want that thing? And that's where the value is. And so you want to focus on those interests, because sometimes your interests might be aligned even though your positions aren't just on its face are different. Yes?
Anytime you go into any kind of stressful situation, do your homework ahead of time. Really understand what the situation is around you, whether it's in the office or wherever you're at. Know the details and make sure that you're going in with a plan of some understanding about where everything could go. I think the worst case can happen is when you get into a stressful situation and you realize either your position is flawed or something's wrong in that process. I think just understanding the dynamics, what's going on, what I'm trying to accomplish before you get into that conversation.
I love it. That's a brilliant point. Because, and especially incorporating it within light theory, you can start to turn on the lights before the conversation through your preparation. You're learning things beforehand. Learn things about the situation, about the organization, about the challenges, and also that particular person. Because the more you know about that person, the more you are able to tailor your message to be more impactful for them. So that's a really great point. Good. Yes.
So I found that a nice way to kind of softly get into confrontation is to use the Columbo technique.
Oh, tell me more.
That's where you say things like, so I know we both really care about animals, and this is what we're trying to do. So I'm a little confused about what you just did, fill in the blank.
Yes.
So help me understand how that's going to get us to where we want to go.
That's really great, because what you're doing there is you're giving the benefit of the doubt up front, because a lot of times when you're having these conversations, people frame it in terms of right and wrong. Oh, Kwame is going to talk to me about it. He thinks I'm stupid or I did something wrong. That's the way that they're looking at it. But by giving them the benefit of the doubt and saying, no, I see that we have the same goals. I'm just not understanding why you took this action and how it relates to the goal. So help me understand that. That's a brilliant way to do it, because it's non-threatening and it solicits information too. And they're going to appreciate it because they recognize that there are two ways you could have approached it. You could have approached it in a judgmental fashion, but you approached it with curiosity. And I think that's a brilliant way to open up those conversations. And I saw your hand there.
Yes, I sometimes self-disclose to begin a difficult conversation.
Good.
Where I'm coming from and why I think the way I think. I'm curious your reaction to that method.
No, I love it. I love it. And it might be surprising for a lawyer to say this, but I think it's helpful because it triggers the norm of reciprocity. And so with reciprocity, what happens is you give somebody something and then they give you something back. Let's not overlook the power of reciprocity. Humans are weird. Humans are really strange, and that's why I like psychology, because the things we do, they don't make sense. So there was a study where there was a company that was trying to get people to do a survey, and so they were trying really hard. People were not responding to the survey. So they said, I know what we're going to do. We're going to say, we'll give you a $50 rebate, $50, if you just do this survey. The survey results still were not good. And so then what they did was they mailed the survey along with a $1 bill, a $1 bill. And the survey responses went up about 40%. Why? Reciprocity. Yeah, so it's when you give somebody something, it creates a feeling of psychological debt. And so they feel the need to reciprocate at a level that they feel is commensurate. And so for you, when somebody is kind of reluctant to engage, if you are vulnerable and you take that first step and share some information, they feel safer. And they say, well, she told me something, I guess I should reciprocate and tell something as well. And so some of the best interviewers are the people who are open with the person that they're talking to. It's like, oh, I deal with that too. And so the person feels more comfortable and the interview gets a lot deeper. So self-disclosure, strategic self-disclosure is a strong way to go. Good. Did I see a hand over here? Yeah.
Along those lines, what do you think, I just want to get your opinion as a person with a psychological background, about sharing not just your opinions, but also your feelings, which you said that conflict is like a negotiation with an attitude, because people have emotions involved. And if you take responsibility for your emotions and you just get them off your chest, does that, how useful is that to making it so that from that point on, you don't have to have this burden on you, and maybe they'll do the same thing.
Yeah. No, this is great, and we're jumping ahead here, and I'll abbreviate my response, but it's really good. This is a really good point for a couple of reasons. So reason number one, like I said before, was reciprocity. The other reason too is that if, for instance, it's a negative thing that you're feeling, it gives you a little bit of grace. So for instance, there's sometimes I feel this emotion called hanger. Anybody feel hangry sometimes? I'm getting close. When I feel hungry, I get angry. And so what I often tell people is like, listen, I just want you to know I'm a little bit hungry right now, so if I come off as short, I apologize. And so what it does is it gives you a little bit of grace. So if you do come off as a little bit upset, then the person's like, oh, well, Kwame said he was upset. It's okay. I see that. It's not a personal thing. That is just his current mental state, his current emotional state. Also, if you talk about the impact that somebody's behavior had on you versus their intentions, then it's a lot better, because if you talk about intentions, that leads to judgment, and then they start to clam up. But if you talk about the impact, you talk about what we agreed happened factually, and then you say the impact. They cannot negotiate the impact it had on you. They can't say, well, Kwame, you weren't mad about it. I was like, really? No. But by focusing on the impact, the emotional impact of their behavior, it's a safer way to do it, because you want everything that you say in these negotiations as much as possible to be unimpeachable. You can't really argue that point. So it's a good strategy. Good. What time is it, real quick?
Yeah, about 4 minutes.
For real?
For real.
Okay, cool. All right. So let's freestyle the end of this. So when it comes to the way that you actually engage, the strategy that we're going to use is called compassionate curiosity. And so there are 3 steps to compassionate curiosity. And in my breakout session, we're going to go through this in a deeper level. And so compassionate curiosity, step number 1 is in acknowledging emotions. Step number 2 is getting curious with compassion. And step number 3 is engaging in joint problem solving. So 1, acknowledge emotions. 2, getting curious with compassion. And 3, joint problem solving. And so with this approach, the cool thing about it is that it can be used internally as well as externally. And it's important to go through this process internally, because a lot of times we jump into these conversations without really having a full understanding of where we stand on the issue and why. And so what I'm going to do here with the 3 minutes I have left is I'll talk about the internal side, and then in my breakout, I'll talk about the external side for how we actually engage. Because in the breakout, we have a hypothetical situation where you can actually do a mock negotiation, utilize the technique, and then we'll do a debriefing session afterwards. So with acknowledging our own emotions, it's important to not only understand where we are emotionally, but why we are there. And so we do this investigation with compassion because we can judge ourselves. Because sometimes we say to ourselves, I shouldn't feel this way. And then if we say we shouldn't feel this way, it stops our exploration, our self-exploration short. And the better we're able to label and identify our emotions, the better able we are to control them during the conversation. And so we want to understand why we feel this way, what are our interests, what do we really want? And then when it comes to the third point, which is joint problem solving, which probably sounds weird for an internal negotiation, who is at the table? What we're talking about is our emotional selves and our logical selves. How do we reconcile what we need emotionally to feel good about this outcome and what we need substantively to put ourselves in the best position? And as a mediator, I see this all the time, where a party might be presented with a settlement offer that makes logical sense. So legally, it reduces their exposure, and economically, it puts them in a decent position, but I can tell they're still uncomfortable with it. And so I would ask them and say, let me ask you this. 1 year from now, having made this deal and then getting the money, how would you feel about yourself as it relates to this deal? And sometimes they might say, I would not be able to respect myself. I feel like I would have rolled over, and I don't feel like it satisfies my emotional needs. Then I say, that's not a good deal. So let's talk about what a good deal would be for you. And so that puts you in a strong position during the actual conversation, because you know that every solution that you provide suits you substantively and emotionally. So you can be more nimble and respond at a higher level during the actual conversation. Make sense? Good. Any questions? Good. All right. So we will finish this part of the presentation at 2 p.m.
That's correct.
Perfect. Good. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.